friends, we're going to continue with our discussion on critical thinking, and our topic for this section is using deductive reasoning. Previously we discussed induction. We came to see opinions and facts, and we saw how inductive reasoning is done. Today we're going to move right into deductive reasoning, which is the direct opposite of inductive reasoning. Now, what is deductive reasoning? You can see right away that deduction, we have the verb deduce from deduction, which means that we've been using deductive reasoning all along. Maybe we don't just know that this is deductive reasoning. So this is going to open our eyes to see that, what we keep doing every day is deductive reasoning, and we'll be able to clarify things about it so we can use deductive reasoning appropriately in our day-to-day activities. So what is it? Deductive reasoning? You start from generalization and derive specific fact from it. So you start from a generalization, which is the broader scope. And then from that broad scope, you come down and then you generate specific fact from that generalization. If you do that, then you are deducing, or you are engaging in deductive reasoning or deduction. So for example, if you say that snakes that have fangs are poisonous, that's a general statement. Let's assume that to be absolutely true. Snakes that have fangs are poisonous. Then you come down. The asp viper has fangs. If this general statement is absolute, and you come down and it is true that the asp viper has fangs, then you can accurately conclude that, therefore, the asp viper is poisonous. So general statement, you narrow down, and eventually you have your conclusion, which is the specific fact you derive from the general statement. So if this is true, there is no way that the conclusion, will be faulty. It has to be true. But what is the name given to this type of argument or this type of reasoning in deduction, where you begin from a general statement and then you come down eventually to your conclusion? What is the name given to this type of reasoning? I'm back. What is the name given to this type of reasoning where you have a general statement from which you derive a specific fact? Of course, it's deduction, but what the argument, these ones are called argument. What is the name given to them? That name is what is called syllogism. Syllogism. S-Y-L-L-O-G-I-S-M. Syllogism is a type of argument used in deductive reasoning. And usually, syllogism comprises three statements. The first super general statement is called the major premise. The second one, which is narrower, is called the minor or the particular premise. It is called the minor or the particular premise because it is the focus of the argument from which the conclusion comes, comparing the two premises. And then we have the conclusion. So in syllogism, which is a type of argument used in deductive reasoning, we have the major premise, the minor or particular premise, and then we have the conclusion. Even though these are statements, they are called arguments. So the argument used there is a term, an operational term. So let's go back to see what we mean by this thing. So if we go back, then we see that snakes that have fangs are poisonous. This is the major premise. Then the minor and the particular premise is that it's made more specific. So not just snakes anymore, but a particular type of snake, the asp viper. And then from the minor premise, joining the two, then we have the conclusion, therefore, the asp viper is poisonous. So this is the major premise, minor or particular premise, conclusion. So this is one example of syllogism in deductive reasoning. Then another example, let's say, all lyrics are poems. What is that? That's a major premise, isn't it? Then you come to the particular premise. All songs are lyrics. Then the conclusion, all songs are poems. Now, we want to be sure if it is true that all lyrics are poems, and then all songs are lyrics, then automatically all songs are poems. So at the end of the day, the conclusion makes sense if the two preambles or the two premises, major premise, minor premise, if they meet, then the conclusion will be true, will be factual, will be acceptable. So what makes deductive reasoning logical or acceptable or true? Then we have to avoid errors in deductive reasoning, which is to make them solid. So an argument is valid only when the two conditions are met. Which two conditions? The conditions in the major premise and the minor or particular premise. If these conditions agree, cohere with each other, make sense logically, then the argument will be valid. Your conclusion will be valid. So the argument must have valid logical forms. The argument must have valid logical forms. So logical forms like it must be meaningful, it must make sense. It shouldn't be senseless. It shouldn't be senseless. It should be logical, it should be natural, it should be plausible. So it must have valid logical forms. Then we want to see one example how we can avoid errors in deductive reasoning. Let's look at this syllogism. Some mammals lay eggs. That is true. Some mammals lay eggs. And the word of interest in this major premise is some, which means not all. Some. And then we come to the particular premise, which is the horse is a mammal. That is also true. And then we come to the conclusion, therefore, the horse lays eggs. We know that in reality that is not true. So even though the statement over here makes sense that some mammals lay eggs, that is true, the horse is a mammal, the conclusion is faulty. Because something is amiss. What is that? Attention is not paid to this. Because it says some. Some. So the conclusion should have been appropriately, therefore, perhaps the horse lays eggs. Or maybe the horse lays eggs. That would have been more appropriate because there is uncertainty, much as there is partiality in the case of the major premise that it is not all mammals but just some. The horse is a mammal. Maybe the horse lays eggs if the individual doesn't have any knowledge about horses. But the reality in the world says that no, horses do not lay eggs. So this conclusion is faulty. Even though there is sense in the major premise and there is sense in the particular premise. What this means is that if you are reasoning deductively, aspect of our syllogism can be correct. Our conclusion can be faulty. So we have to make sure of everything. And once we make sure of everything, it would be very easy for us to be sure that our conclusions will be realistic. Will be realistic. Now we would want to find out, just as it is in everyday life, we always want to avoid making mistakes. And mistakes are errors that can be avoided. But it's also good we identify the mistakes so we know exactly what or how we can correct them if we come across them. So some of these errors. So fallacies in reasoning. And what is a fallacy? Any error in reasoning is called a fallacy. And you've heard of the adjective fallacious or fictitious. They all come from this word fallacy, which means not true, an error. So any error you make in reasoning, in critical thinking, that error can be called a fallacy, singular, if it is more than one fallacies. So we have examples of fallacies in reasoning, overgeneralization. We came to see how dangerous overgeneralization is, particularly when it comes to stereotyping things and people, and that it can lead to very expensive ends. It can be very costly. It can lead to war. It can lead to misunderstanding. It can lead to troubles. Overgeneralization is one main fallacy. Of course, one of its type is the most dangerous type is stereotyping, as we said in level 2. So stereotyping is a fallacy. And then false premises. If the premises on which we base our conclusion are false, our conclusion will be false. And if our conclusion is false or faulty, then any problem we want to solve will be a matter of just worsening things, not to solve problems. And then another form of fallacy is invalid form. It's invalid form. It's an invalid form. So these are errors in reasoning. So what have we done today? We've come to see that deductive reasoning is what we do in our everyday life. We derive a specific fact from generalization, and then we have what we call syllogism, which is the argument in deductive reasoning, where we have the major premise, which is the most general statement. Then we have the minor or particular premise, which is further narrowed down, and then we have the edge of the cone, which is the conclusion from the conclusion. And we saw some examples regarding the syllogism, and we came to see how we can avoid errors in deductive reasoning. An argument is valid only when the two premises or the conditions in the premises are met, major premise, minor premise. If they cohere, if they agree, then definitely the conclusion will be solid. And an argument must have logical forms. And then we also came to see that we have fallacies or errors in reasoning that we need to avoid, namely overgeneralization, stereotyping, false promises, invalid form, and other one. These are just but a few. Thank you, and have a wonderful time. Bye-bye.